Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. This is the second of our webinar series for the AUR sponsored grant, Where's Waldo, helping mid-career faculty stand out from the crowd. So I just want to remind everybody what this grant is all about and what some of the components are. The purpose really is to develop and implement a curriculum for career development centered on mid-career faculty, where we know that there is really substantial need. This is going to be consisting of a webinar series, of which this is our second one, that is open to all participants who are AUR members. We're also going to be providing a reading list and some curated YouTube videos on productivity topics that we think are going to be very beneficial to mid-career faculty who are really trying to balance clinical work and all of their administrative responsibilities. The other component of this grant is the small circle, the small groups, where we are going to be shortly sending out a call for applications for a small group of about 10 people, which will include peer mentorship, a Coursera coursework that will be done together as a group, some research and article writing mentorship, CV analysis, finding some gaps, and some guidance to help you fill them in. There will also be a virtual journal club as part of this. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Puneet to start our introductions.
Thank you all for coming. I want to introduce my co-speaker today, Dr. Davenport. Dr. Davenport is the Service Chief and Vice Chair in the Department of Radiology at Michigan Medicine. He doesn't need an introduction. He's internationally recognized expert on safety and efficacy of radiographic contrast and Vice Chair of ACR Commission on Quality and Safety. He's a co-author on national policy statements and has published over 200 manuscripts and founded Michigan Radiology Quality Collaborative and is a funded investigator. His primary clinical interests include patient safety, high-value care, and urologic imaging. We're very excited that he's here, and we're hoping to share our experience in navigating mid-career issues together.
Cool. Thanks very much. Appreciate the introduction. There's not a lot of content out there about mid-career faculty and how to develop. And so I was thinking about what best to present. And I'm thinking about talking about how we make decisions generally. And so I'm going to put some slides up if that's okay, Puneet. And just speak to the group a bit about how we make career decisions in general and how I think by making career decisions in a particular way, we can improve the quality of our life. These are my disclosures here. So I'm going to start just by telling a story. And this is a story about a person named Jane. And Jane, we're going to say, is in her 30s. She's a rising star. She went to a high-powered residency. She went to a high-powered fellowship program. She volunteered in a bunch of countries during medical school, was a national collegiate athlete. She was just shy of becoming an Olympian, has a bunch of papers that are first offered on novel machine learning algorithms that are on the cusp of being translated into clinical care. She's got a winning attitude. She's got a whole bunch of mentors and sponsors that are supporting her. And after her last scientific presentation, she was being heavily recruited by a bunch of other people. And so for many people, they would look at a story like this and say, wow, this person's achieved success. But in this story, Jane stresses, and everyone keeps telling her she's the envy of the world and her academic career is in the stratosphere, but she's a little uncertain. Yesterday, she received an official job offer from a prestigious institution to be on the fast track to what they're calling academic stardom, but she's not really sure whether to accept it. It would require her to highly subspecialize in GI radiology, abandon most of her other clinical skills, and spend a bunch of her effort pursuing grants, we'll say about 50%. If she takes it, she's been assured that her career is all but solidified and nothing's going to stand in the way of her success. So the question for the group to ponder is based on this story, do you think that she should take it? What do you think she should do? And I'd like just the group to ponder these options. So should Jane take the job? Should she negotiate for higher pay? Negotiate for more protected time, decline the job, find a different academic post, enter private practice, do something different altogether, or how should we know what she should do? And from my standpoint, I don't really know. I don't know Jane. I don't know how to advise her. And sometimes when people come to us asking for advice about what do I do next in my career, I think what the average person is seeking at the forefront of their mind is, I want help picking my idea. And our natural instinct is to tell them, well, you should go do X or Y or Z. But ultimately, the person giving us that advice is not the person who's receiving the advice and has their own value system, their own judgments. And when we give specific advice to people, it's oftentimes maybe not the best advice for that individual. Whereas instead, helping someone shape the decision-making process or identify things that they care about that they should consider in the decision-making process is probably a more valuable way to give advice for someone who's in their career, whether they're mid, junior, or late in their career. So how should we figure out what to do if we're making a decision about what to do next in our lives? My argument, this is just an opinion here, is we should start with core values, principles, and ideals. And then once we got that nailed down and who's us, then we consider something based on the merits or facts involved. Merits or facts might be something like how much vacation time, how much GI radiology, how much grants, and so on. And then we get to hopefully what can be a sound or wise decision. And this is affected by a lot of things like extrinsic pressures. So for example, friends, mentors, family putting pressure on us to make a decision, and intrinsic pressures, legacy, fear, perfectionism. And this is challenging because predicting the future is hard, and it's hard to know how things are going to work out. And even if we make a decision based on wise judgment, things might end up unexpectedly, even if the decision was made well. And we rarely have all the information we need. We're typically making decisions without all the information. So this person who's offering this person the job, offering Jane the job, is giving their perspective on what the job could be. But from Jane's point of view, she doesn't really know all the details and the landscape there. That's my opinion of how decisions are optimally made, but I don't think that's how decisions are usually made. Usually how they're made is we start by considering the merits or facts. So how much vacation time, how much GI time, how much time on grants, what's the location, where's the geography, those kinds of things. And that decision-making is then affected by those extrinsic pressures, unclear information, and intrinsic pressures I mentioned earlier. And we don't really feel comfortable with what we're deciding. It's a little bit tossed about, and then we kind of go for it and hope for the best. And lurking in the back somewhere, kind of hiding behind the scenes, are those core values, principles, and ideals that we have not formally thought about or addressed before getting to those merits and the facts. So what do I mean when I talk about values or principles, and how do we use those to make decisions? I'm going to give you some things that I identify with, and they're probably true, and mine are different than yours. And this doesn't mean that these are the right values, or just happen to be how I make decisions. And I promise you, yours are going to be different. Here's some things that make me up. I try to think that other people come first. Strife has failed diplomacy. I want to address what I can control. We're a long way from perfection. Effort trumps talent. Alliances trump aggression. Wealth is a means, not an end. And know the truth, but focus on the positive. And these are some things I use to make my decisions. So when an opportunity comes along where I'm trying to decide what I want to do next, I'm going to filter that decision through this lens. Let me give you 4 examples. Let's say an opportunity comes up where I could do a lot of work on a project, a great personal sacrifice, but the outcome of that has the potential to improve healthcare, where it's going to affect lots and lots of patients. Well, if I filter that through my values, say, well, I do think that other people come first, so the personal sacrifice is worth giving up. If it's something that I can do, maybe I should do something about it instead of waiting for someone else to figure it out. And I recognize that our current state is not perfect. We should keep striving for better, better, better. So, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to spend a lot of my personal time and hope to improve patient care. I'll give you another example. Take a highly paid job where I read as fast as possible. And there's certainly jobs out there where I could do that tomorrow. But if I filter that through the values I put on the earlier slide, if I think other people come first and wealth is a means, not an end, for me, that wouldn't be an appealing job. That doesn't mean it's not a good job for some people. It's just, for me, it's not something I would pursue. Work collaboratively to improve IR and surgery relations. Well, that's a sticky subject and be like pretty painful. Take a lot of work and a lot of heartache, but well, let's go through the values again. Strife has failed diplomacy. Alliances trump aggression. Know the truth that things aren't so great right now, but focus on the positive. How can we make this better in the future? And based on those, maybe I should take that on. And you can see how using this value system to apply that to opportunities allows us to make a decision that's likely to align with us. So we're in the thick of it, doing something real hard. I can always say, my life is not so great right now because I'm doing all this difficult work on that research project or this IR surgery relations, but it's aligning closely to what I care about. And therefore, when it's tough, I'm going to be able to sustain my way through it because it aligns with what I care about. Last example here, I could, if I wanted to, publish lots and lots of papers that were low impact research to pad my CV and make it look like I am productive. I could do that, but for me, I don't really align with that because for me, other people come first. I want to address what I can control. We're a long way from perfection. And based on that, I want to focus on research that hopefully has an opportunity to impact patient care. And that's just how I make a decision about choosing a new research project. So these are examples of using value-based decisions to come to a plan. So let's go back to Jane for a second. So all we know about Jane's situation is a few facts about the offer and a brief sketch of her CV and background. So a more relevant question for Jane is, what are your core values, principles, and ideals before getting to the facts and the merits of the opportunity? And really nobody can answer that except for Jane. It's up to her to decide what those things are, not somebody else. Someone can coach Jane to help her think and reflect on what those things might be, help her think about what's important to consider, but no one can tell her what is more or less important. Without that knowledge, the decision really becomes transactional and less likely to achieve long-term synergy or meaning for Jane's life. If Jane is afraid about certain things, the question should be, why is she afraid? And likely that fear is a reflection of a core value. It's lurking underneath somewhere, it's nervous, it's about to be ignored. So identify your core values and expressly consider them. So I might articulate, I put other lives first, which means I'm willing to have some personal sacrifice involved. I am fundamentally an altruist and an optimist, which has both strengths and weaknesses. I believe I'm here to serve other people, and that's going to be the definition of whether I've lived a quality life. And that's going to be my articulation. What is Jane's? If Jane's feeling torn, she's probably being influenced by a combination of internal and external pressures. It's unlikely that the merits of each option are identical. It's more likely that the weights are unclear because the priorities have yet to be filtered through Jane's core principles. So what should she value more or less? And when she's considering that job offer, should be based on what she thinks is really deeply important to her. So openly identify those pressures that are steering you. What's pushing you to do something different in your life or to stay the same? So something I might articulate would be, my mom's legacy is affecting my decision-making here. She always wanted me to do something. My mom died when I was in residency and had a pretty profound effect on my life and influenced kind of decisions that I was making. I would classify that as an external pressure. Is Jane certain she's considered all the available options? So far, we've just heard of one offer and 4 potential offers, but these are all academic archetypes. And there's really a million possibilities for Jane that don't follow a typical or an expected path. So innovate options and avoid false choices. Sometimes we consider an option strongly only because it coincidentally happens to be available to us at that moment. You know, if someone comes to you and says, I'd like to offer you a job to go do something else or give you a research opportunity, the question worth asking is, if that person had never come to your door and you thought about that independent of the opportunity, is it something you would have seriously pursued doing? Or is it merely just an opportunist kind of action that you're taking? So in Jane's case, maybe she had a history where she was working in Nairobi and she identified there was a clear need for radiologists with GI expertise. And maybe that's something that's important to her. Another way to consider this whole concept I'm presenting to you is that when people say this is how to be successful, that really has no inherent meaning. And that meaning is multiplied by all the different people filtered through their own value system. So a question for the group, hypothetical, rhetorical here, how will you know when you're successful? And I've asked this question to large groups, and I could show you the data is that it's all over the place. I mean, people's definitions of success and what means they're successful are variable, and it depends on what they care about. So what would Jane's answer be, and how might that answer influence her decision-making? So let's think a little bit about this strategically. If she's going to make a decision strategically. So this is Jane walking along a path, and if she's interested in knowing about how to be successful, she might look to other people of how they've defined success. And you can see there's other people walking up this hill right here. And if Jane's like, well, shoot, those people are walking up the hill and they're giving me advice about how to be successful, then maybe I should just follow them. But if Jane's idea of success is over there, meaning not the same hill that everybody else is marching toward, and that idea of success is informed by her core values, really those sources of good advice are wrong and they're misleading. because what they're telling her to do is go away from what she actually values and cares about. So this is honest advice, but it's really misguided advice because they don't know what Jane cares about. If you never define success, you risk taking the wrong path or taking an inefficient path or living with indecision. So you could end up in a place you don't want to be and be like, how did I get here? Or you might say, I finally figured out what my identity was and I'm finally happy, but gee, what a waste of 20 years. If you define success, ignoring your core values or what makes you up, you risk burnout, which is a consequence of moral injury, chronic malaise, and perhaps a lifetime of regret. So some strategic thinking, again, here's Jane's current state. And if she just kind of goes through life through the natural flow of events without intervention, kind of bounces around, she's going to end up in some unplanned future outcome. And it may be okay. Maybe she likes that. But if she's strategic about it and says, I know what my idea of success is, that's informed by my core values, I'm going to intentionally move in that direction through directed action. And along the way, I'm going to identify certain milestones. Like maybe if I want to go work in Nairobi, the first thing I have to do is get my credentialing. And then I've got to make sure I know GI radiology. And then I got to make some contacts, some preset milestones or scheduled reflection. Am I making progress towards my goal? Now, it's never going to be a straight path. It's always going to meander all over the place. And she may end up in a place she doesn't know about in the future, but at least have a direction of where we think we're going informed by those values. So I'm going to tell a little story here, and this is going to go poetic for a second, then I'll be done. You can be rid of me. So why do life choices hurt? When mentoring people, peers, colleagues through major career decisions, this is a frequent discussion point. And people will say, I don't know what to do. And we wrestle with these choices and we twist them into knots until finally this pressure, and usually it's time, forces our hand and we decide. And relief at this unwinding soon gives way to grief, which works its necessary stages and then finally resolves. And all parts of this mental writhing exact a toll. And I think it's because there's torment in differentiation. And we feel it deep down as pieces of the possible are plucked from us and vaporized. And with every path that dissipates, we become less pluripotential. We aren't regenerating stem cells, we're more red blood cells with a circulating half-life. And most of us, particularly mid-career faculty, we're not born yesterday. And I think we struggle with these decisions because our unconscious knows this. It knows that the choices that we make demand a permanent sacrifice. You can do what you want, but I'm going to take a part of you forever that can't be recaptured. So decisions jail options, and this makes us a little bit sad. And there's grief when we give up something that we could have been. But I would argue we were always only ever going to be one person, not the multiverse of endless possibilities we might have imagined for ourselves. And our youthful immortality was in many ways a lie. We're finite and we're singular, and we will die. And the paths don't continue forever, and we only get one line. The more I'm privileged to witness the agonizing decision-making of others, the more I've come to believe that the choices we make are generally a struggle between what we know is right for ourselves and what pressure is telling us to do. Echoes of some paternal influence, a childhood dream, or an overzealous mentor, or some inertia from a once taken but misbegotten path. And choosing what we know is right kills a thing we cherish or acknowledges a past mistake, while siding with pressure sacrifices what is best. And rarely it's a complete unknown or random throw of the dice. Usually we know the sides. What we struggle to do is select which piece of us to end. And when sorting out challenging career decisions of my own, or when trying or to help other people make career decisions, this is the approach that I take. First, I think we have to recognize this is not easy, and rarely is the decision being made solely on the basis of facts. Learn which options are likely best personally and which are being influenced by internal and external pressures. Sort out what those pressures are and explicitly describe them. If the best personal option is not clear, discover it by uncovering your core values and aligning those values with the options that are available. It's really the value system and the priorities that should be used to inform the choice. Understand the interests motivating the decision and learn why the decision is being forced if it's not immediately obvious. and innovate options that are not originally under consideration and avoid false dichotomies or false choices. And then realize that every decision brings loss because parts of an identity, imagined or real, are being sacrificed in the wager. And loss brings grieving, and that grieving requires preemptive attention. Much of the pain in personal decision-making, I think, is here, not in the facts that separate the choices. So I can't be everything. All choices restrict my future, and decisions sacrifice a part of me. And the beginning of my tale can't be unwritten, but what's up to me is to decide is how do I want it to end? What's my end goal in mind, and can I be strategic about that? Erasure of hypothetical futures is searing because it acknowledges things we won't be, and differentiation is a stark reminder of mortality. Although we might revisit the choices of our past, that visitation is often an illusion. Time moves relentlessly forward, and decisions are the opportunities in life to affirm who we are. I'm a doctor, and my life is what I make of it. It's the sum of all my decisions, and my choices hopefully mirror core values. If I can only be one person, the person I will represent is the values that form me. So thank you very much. And I just would advise the group to be strategic and wise in our choices. So thank you.
Thank you, Matt. That was exceptional. Please put in your comments in chat or hold on to them. We'll have enough time, hopefully, at the end to share some stories, have some comments, and then indulge in some discussion. So I'm Puneet Bhargava. I work at the University of Washington. I'm an abdominal imager. As I've been thinking about this topic pretty deeply for a long time, because it not just affects me, it affects all of my mid-career colleagues, and we talk about topics related to this incessantly when we meet or chat and during work hours, because we all struggle with this. I don't think I have all the answers, but I can maybe provide some insight as to how I think and ideas from people that I have spoke to and my mentors. So what I'm going to do in the next 15 to 20 minutes is talk about understanding some mid-career transitions, how to maybe think about when you take some high stakes decisions, and some lessons from success and failure. So I think this is what I think sort of encapsulate what mid-career faculty feel like. So we feel like we're not really too old to start something new, and I'm too young to give up on my dreams. And to be honest, like mid-career faculty positions are pretty awesome. We're no longer just out of training. We have some clinical experience. And even though our list can be insanely long at times, we do know how to get through our day. And, our kids are sort of inching towards middle high school, and we have a life outside of work. So it's actually, if you think about life, this is a beautiful time of life where things are really going well for us, except that internally we feel like this. We feel like we're drowning and we need help. And it's true. There, like Matt said, there's not a whole lot of resources out there for mid-career faculty, and that's why I'm so appreciative of Tara and Jessica's energy in trying to create some of these resources where we can at least think and sort through some of these challenges together. Now, one theme that I've noticed is that when you go and have discussions with, your supervisors, your section chiefs, your chairman or chairwoman, the question that's asked is, there's two ways these discussions go. First is, we are often told that we're doing good work and we should continue and develop a body of work in that space, and then people would consider advancing us. That's one kind of conversation. The second type of conversation that happens is that somebody truly believes in us, what we're about, sees the spark in us, and they're going to advance us irrespective of the body of work that we are created. And I think we have to be very perceptive to the kind of communications coming towards us and then make our mid-career decisions, because based on what you might be hearing, you might have to take different decisions. But before you think too deeply about this topic, I think it's very important to know what are your core interests, what are your values, and what are the skills that you bring to the table, and think about opportunities that exist in your current situation. Think about how you can leverage happiness in your current situation without having to disrupt your family life or selling your home and moving to a new city, new state even. And network and talk to people, talk to even younger people, talk to people outside of your community, outside of medicine, to see how people do this, because they will give you lots of really good ideas. But I think, regardless of the challenges, I think we have to be excited. We have to be positive and continue to believe that that the second half of our career will be way better than the first. And I think there's always this thing called the migration temptation, where you're seeing a lot of people who are moving jobs and changing universities or moving into private practice, going after more money, more time, better administrative roles and whatnot. It might seem very glamorous from the outside, but I think it's important to think about how, if you are going to go that way, how are you going to manage that transition? Because it is going to be a significant transition. So I would encourage everybody to think about yourself as a sculptor of your career, where you go slowly into making your career as you see fit, and continue to make little changes and keep chugging until you make art that would excite you. And I think the common problem that we face is that we think of success in the traditional fashion as a ladder, where we go from step one to step two all the way to the top, and it's very linear. And it's not linear at all. It's actually more like a lattice, where you might go through your career starting off as a researcher, but you may be interested more as an educator mid-career, or you may become an administrator and you may decide that that's not bringing a whole lot of joy, or maybe there's somebody better who could do it and you want to be a full-time clinician, and you may even quit mid-career to become an entrepreneur, and you may come back to full-time medicine based on maybe the stresses you experience, or maybe now you have enough money and you want to just be a doctor in the true sense. So it's going to be not a linear path, and I don't think it should be. But you've got to think strategically. You've got to think about the things that you're really good at, and have a strategy in place. And you can't really do really well until you know what you're really about. So I think it's very important to spend some time alone, trying to figure out what you're really about, what brings you joy, and what drives you. And I think this thinking needs to happen on paper, not in your head. So journaling is a good place to start. If you're making a big decision, it helps to write down pros and cons. And the reason thinking on paper works better than thinking on a computer or in your head is because most people can't write as fast as they can think, and that actually slows the brain down quite a bit. So there's quite a bit of deep thinking involved when you're thinking on paper compared to when you're thinking in your head. But I think regardless of what decision you might take mid-career, it's going to take you somewhere very different. And that's okay. All of these places are great, but mid-career, you're sort of at crossroads that, and that's what makes this interesting and high stakes, because how you decide is going to decide where you end up when you're ready to walk away from your radiology career. Which brings me to something called informational interviewing. And I think it's sad that we're not really going to a lot of meetings and meeting people in person, but it helps to connect with your colleagues, constantly talk to people in your community, people who inspire you, maybe some good leaders and chairs. Get to know them, think about what they're about, because working for a supervisor, a boss, a chairperson who is out to support you and is your wingman or wingwoman can do wonders to your happiness. Whether or not your career goes a long way, that's a separate story, but you'll certainly have a lot of fun doing it. So how does one go about doing some informational interviewing? So the way to do that is you reach out to someone and say, I'm so and so, I'm working in this place, and I'm interested to learn about whatever it is that you're doing, and it helps to bring up somebody's name so that you can break the ice with them and say that this person mentioned that you would be a great person to talk to, and can we chat for 20 minutes, get a cup of coffee, whenever it's convenient to you, and take some notes from the meeting as to what positive interactions you took away from that conversation. But remember that they're only going to talk about the positives. Nobody's going to tell you the challenges that they're facing, at least in the first meeting. So ultimately, like Matt said, it's very important to align your skills and your values with what you're interested in the second half of your career, especially. Which brings me to this idea from Simon Sinek called, Know Your Why. And Find Your Why is his less famous book, but it's actually a 4-hour guide, which helps you find your why, because most of the time that we spend is spent thinking about what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. But why are we doing this, and what drives us is way more important. And if you know your why, your how and what becomes significantly easier. So I took this exercise and I found some threads for myself. I definitely aspire to leave radiology better than I found it because of maybe a few things that I did. It was also important to me to experience everything radiology has to offer. So I'd be okay taking a few risky decisions in the hope that at least even if they didn't work out great, at least I tried to experience all facets of radiology. And for all of us, these things will be very different. But I think it helps to think about values in different buckets. Definitely think about the financial aspect of it for your family, all the way down to the lifestyle that you desire. And I've been a huge proponent in the last couple of years about using financial independence as a burnout antidote. And to take that a step further, if you actually maximize your retirement savings and understand the value that money brings in your account, and maybe even get some money outside of your regular salary, do some entrepreneurship or consulting work on the side. Get to the point in your career where money doesn't matter anymore. The paycheck is out of the equation. Then you can take career decisions for the last decade of your career where it's pure joy, and you can actually take a less paying job, but a more satisfying one. So there's lots of side hustle ideas. We're planning a separate session on that, so I won't dig into too much detail. But here's an article that we wrote recently exploring side hustles, which you might want to peruse through and look at the tax advantages, because we are, as a country, we're set up to do business, and there's lots of tax codes written to turbocharge your savings if you have a side hustle going on. I'm also a huge believer in expanding your network and using social media. Lately, I have embraced this idea from Austin Kleon. He has a famous book called Show Your Work. So I'm actually trying to put as much of my work in the public domain as I possibly can. It brings out amazing opportunities. You start to network with people you didn't even know existed, and it's just mind-boggling how that actually works. But if you want to be progressing in a linear fashion, and maybe you just want the leadership opportunities that radiology has to offer, there's nothing wrong with it. I would say do a couple of projects that maybe improves the quality of work we do, maybe improves the safety profile, work on some things that change our management guidelines and improve care for our patients, but also help your department save some money. And if you can pull off a couple of those projects, that actually makes you very valuable. And when you're going through an interview process to take some of these jobs, they will ask you, what's the body of work in this space? What is your leadership experience? So it helps to write in that space too. But ultimately, I think about the stories you'll share with your grandkids when you're retired. So, what did you do in your career? What were the highlights? Those are the things that you want to think about. And the traditional model of success is this, where most people aspire to take the highest rank available locally. That may or may not be something for you. I think this is the way to go. Think about where you are, and if something's not bringing joy, get to where you want to be. Things that brings you more joy and satisfaction is how you want to think. And don't think like this, like, you're going to get the job of a chair or whatever it is that you aspire, and then think that that title will make you seem like you're an amazing radiologist, and then your family is going to be super impressed. It actually doesn't work like that. And I'm truly a believer of this, that start with happiness first. Don't set any expectations for happiness. Be just happy that you're alive and healthy. And happy people do good work. And when you do good work, that's satisfying in it itself. And if big success happens or not, that's anybody's guess, because everybody's definition of success is different, but we all will be happier if we can do good work. So with that, I rest my case, and let's move on to the Q&A part of this webinar.
Wonderful. Thank you both. I think that those were excellent talks. Lots of very important pearls for our audience to hear. We do have a question in the chat, which is, what do you do when you know your core values and you are willing to sacrifice your time to do what makes you happy with teaching time and research, but people/peers keep telling you that you will burn out? Do you take that as experienced advice from seniors, or keep going? I'll turn that.
Matt, do you want to go first?
Sure, happy to. I think everyone's different. So I was having a conversation with someone recently. This person does Ironmans. They are exceptionally motivated. They wake up early, they go to bed late, they do a million things. And for this person, doing a million things is what makes that person happy. And there was a conversation about whether they should take on more roles, more activities, more responsibilities. And one person was arguing that they should not, because conventional wisdom is taking on lots of stuff will lead to burnout. And that person was articulating something very similar to what the person in the chat is saying, which is, well, I like doing this stuff. So for me, that's part of what makes me happy. My opinion is that all advice is general, and what really is important is what's specific to you. So if this specific person says, I want to sacrifice things in pursuit of my core value, I like doing all of this stuff, I find joy in it, my argument is that the concept around burnout for that individual, for that specific activity, probably doesn't apply. Burnout, I believe, happens when there is a misalignment between what we're doing and what we value. So I'll give you a small personal anecdote. In the early part of my career, I would spend many, many hours writing papers on the weekends and the evenings. And for me, that was like a hobby. I liked it. It was fun for me. It was the process of discovery was fun. The process of analyzing results was fun. I got excited when I could look at an Excel spreadsheet and crunch numbers or something. So for me, that was a joyful activity. Therefore, it did not contribute to burnout, despite the fact I was spending huge amounts of hours on it. So I really think it depends on what we like to do, and think about, just because it's technically labeled as work doesn't mean it's inherently going to cause you burnout if it's something you actually enjoy doing.
Yeah, my take on that is pretty similar. I'll say things that, in addition to what Matt has said, I think the new word for burnout is moral injury, and that is something that is inflicted on someone rather than um, something that you experience based on um, your own doing, essentially. So I think there's limited hours in the day. There's limited energy that we all have. Now, of course, if you're doing Ironman, I suppose you could argue that you have limitless energy. But I think most people have limited energy. So you want to think about every time that you're taking on a significant role, is there something that you can let go? Because when you start letting go, that might be a great opportunity for a younger colleague. So I think like if you're leading something or you've been doing something for a while, think about it as your job is to take it from point A to point B, and then leaving it for someone to take it from point B to point C, and hopefully each step is higher and better than before. When you start thinking about like you know that this is a journey and you contributed positively to it and you moved on, that is a good way. I actually don't like people who hoard titles. I don't think highly of departments who give 8, 9 titles to one person and everybody else is left struggling for just to find little opportunities, and they have to look outside to be able to do things that they're passionate about. I think uh, but I think this burnout thing is real because at work, there are many things that we have to do. We have to read our studies. If you're a younger academic professional, then you have to write your share of the papers, even if you don't find Excel sheets exciting. And then, you know, you're supposed to teach, and at the same time, you know, many of us have small kids and limited time outside of work. But I think if we can figure out a way to align our work with our passions, then I think very few people get burnt out doing the things that they absolutely love. And I think that's where we want, like, so you know, the way of thinking where we used to think like the three-legged or four-legged academic stool, where you know every person in academics has to advance on all the academic missions, might be getting too old. And I think we might want to revisit that and say, well, if this person is an amazing educator, why is this person writing a grant and making themselves miserable? And I think as long as we have enough people working on everything, um, then then that would be awesome. I think there will be a few people who will do 2 or 3 things at a high level, and that would make a department really enjoyable place to work. That's my take on this.
Thanks so much for those responses. I'd love to sort of tie some of what Puneet just said in with one of my observations of Matt's presentation, and that's sort of this concept of acknowledging the loss that we face in our decision making as we maybe pivot our career or take something on that we hadn't previously done. And so I guess to tie these two concepts together, Matt, I'm wondering if you might start by kind of giving your thoughts on like how one can sort of address this inherent loss and prevent it from becoming consuming and, maybe pushing you into the burnout phase if you're kind of stuck in this like loss versus taking something new on, and how do you mitigate that loss?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't have the great answer for it. I think, again, it starts with understanding yourself very well and acknowledging that when you go to the car dealership and there's like 15 cars, you're not going to go home with all of them. You're going to go home with one of the, well, maybe you are. I mean, Jessica, you make a lot of money in Wisconsin, maybe you will, but you're probably going to go home with one car or 0 cars. And life is like that also in some respects. Like when you're making a choice, you're not going to probably be able to pick 15 of the opportunities. You're probably going to pick a smaller subset of those opportunities, and just acknowledge that to yourself. I can only pick one of these. And the quality of my life is not defined by the number of things that I do necessarily. It's defined by like, if what I'm doing right now is something that I value and care about, is a thing I'm pursuing, something that I value and care about, and I'm finding reward in it. And also just acknowledge the fact that you're sacrificing something. You're not going to be that thing, and that's okay. Like I came to terms with the fact that I'm never going to be a urologist, or I'm never going to be a someone going to space, probably. Maybe Richard or Branson can like fly me up there, but I'm probably never going to go into space. I'm probably never going to design a building. I'm probably never going to build a bridge. I'm probably never going to be an education person for middle school. And those are things like I've just come to terms with, in the same way that I think in academics, we have a couple of options in front of us, whether to choose this research project or that academic title. But in reality, we're already within a very narrow frame of reference. There's so many things we've already chosen to exclude in our lives of possibilities and things we've acknowledged we have not done, and just recognize that's just a normal part of life, I guess, in a way. It's a bad answer, but that's, I think, starting with like core values and understanding yourself, recognizing this is a normal part of the process. And also, I've already given up millions and millions of other things and chosen not to do it. And I can't go home with all 15 cars unless I work at Wisconsin.
I think we've talked and heard a lot about core values and passions and understanding yourself. How would you help our audience to figure out what their core values are, and where should they start? How do they start that process of self-reflection to really understand what's important to them?
And I don't have a great answer for this, but what I've tried to do, because I think it's important, what I've tried to do with some people, much to their chagrin, is I've tried to have an exercise where we actually write them down and have a thoughtful conversation about it. Like, challenge each other to write down the 5 or 10 things that we think make us up, and then talk about them and say, like, is this something that needs to go on the paper or not? At a recent meeting I was at, we did an exercise where people had a series of core value cards, and they were forced to choose and select between them to identify the top 7, then the top 3, then the top 1 that they really, really valued. I think exercises like that, prioritization exercises, can be helpful, but also it's opening. It's like threatening in a way, because you're like having to sort of look deep down. It can cause almost like a crisis, a little bit of crisis of yourself. Like, well, I don't know what my values are. Is that a problem? But I think being intentional about it and being thoughtful and actually just having an exercise, you write them down or pick through cards or something like that would be my advice.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on that, my wife and kids are great at identifying some of the things that drive me. Like, my wife actually told me I was going to do a faculty development course for our school, and we do that every year. And she always knows that I'm super happy and energetic that very morning. And she pointed that out to me, and she said, "You should do more of that. That really makes you happy." And I was like, "Yeah, I knew that, but thank you for letting me know in such clear terms that." She's like, "You come home late that day, but you're super happy. You should try to do more of that." So I think whenever you're having a great time, something makes you happy. If a person makes you happy, if something in your job makes you happy, if teaching makes you happy, or teaching a topic makes you happy, or going to a course, or whatever it is that drives you, even if it's outside of work. For me, I can tell you that every single time that I read a book outside of medicine or do something outside of medicine, I actually learn something that makes me a better radiologist. So doing something that makes you happy is a great investment in your time, and a happy radiologist is a very valuable one.
That's great. So what I'm hearing, Puneet, is that you're sort of recommending like a 360 evaluation onto your core values to have some external input on what other people perceive might make you happy. It looks like we have a question in the chat about leadership positions and maybe the lack of succession planning. So the specific question is, what happens when the leadership position within your organization that you have enjoyed either no longer brings you joy, or you would like to continue on your path and there's no succession plan, or others that are willing to take on this role or have the skills to take this role on? So, what do you do in these situations where you can't pass the baton or there's no plan to pass the baton?
A couple thoughts about that. I recently had a conversation just yesterday with someone about leadership positions, and I have a philosophy that as soon as we get that title, like on day 1, the first thing we should think is, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? But the second thing we should think is, who is going to do this if I get hit by a bus, or if I can't do this anymore, if I go somewhere else? who's going to take over this job. And I think it's actually fundamental to any program that has leaders in positions that they identify who their successors are going to be and proactively, work on that. And in fact, part of the annual review for those leaders should be, who are you training to do this job if you can't do it anymore? And honestly, if someone's not ready to automatically fill that space, that speaks to a broader kind of challenge that department is experiencing, in my opinion. I think it should be something that's intentional and dedicated. Now, let's say that we've done our due diligence, or we haven't, and we end up in a situation like what Susan is describing here, where the person doing the job is really hating it, and they look back and say, well, I don't know, there's no one to fill this role. I would think of it in the following way. Again, what do you value? Are you somebody who really primarily values like your personal happiness and your personal wellness to a greater degree than what you perceive to be the effect on the well-being of the department, or not? Is that self-sacrifice that you're doing, Susan, is that self-sacrifice for the benefit of everyone else in the department something that actually is part of what you care about? And if you were to abandon it, it would cause you a moral injury that you'd say, I can't handle that. That'd be my first recommendation, is to consider which of those two things you value more. And there's not a right or wrong answer to that. And I think the second thing is, we can surprise ourselves. Often we think there's no one who can take that job, but there actually is. And I think this is something I would just emphasize, is that many times we think people are not replaceable, but almost everybody really is. That's the sad truth. Most people can be replaced, and they might not have exactly the same skills. They might do it in a different way, but they'll probably do it in an effective way. And my hunch is that someone in your institution could probably be able to do that job if they were encouraged to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing I would say is find a mentee and start training them to replace you, and then move on to other things, because life isn't that much fun when you're not having fun every day. So if you didn't have a fun time at work a certain day, definitely find time to do something fun after work, but try to have fun most days at work. And the other thing that I heard was find satisfaction at work and find joy from your family. And then if you're trying to find too much joy at work, sometimes that can be a problem.
Great, thank you for the answers. Looks like we've had several comments about passing the baton. How do you, as leaders in your institutions at this mid-career level, identify people that you really think are the up-and-comers? And how do you help them to figure out if this is a next good step for them?
Yeah, there's sort of the conventional way it's done. And then that conventional way that it's done also has a lot of biases that we have to be careful about. So the conventional way that it's done is someone comes to you and expresses their interest, or you find someone who you think does a great job in something. And the challenge with that is you will overlook people who would do a great job, but maybe they don't have that forwardness to come and talk to you. And also you risk identifying people who are just like you, and you don't think about people who are not just like you. So I think the conventional way to do it has some merit, because obviously we are judges of talent. We can see who's producing or not producing or whatever. But I think there also has to be more of a deliberate attempt to spread it around a little bit, make open opportunities to people. In our department, when we have a new leadership position, we really try hard to advertise it and encourage people to apply for that position, even if they're not part of our decision-making structure, and have like a formal kind of encouragement to participate. To find leaders within committees or to find leaders within a space, we'll try to get an open solicitation for people to join committees that then identify those people within that committee to then come up to try and get rid of some of these biases and concerns. And the last thing I would do is, or suggest, is that when we're picking leaders for positions, that process needs to have structure and needs to be free from bias. And some of the old historic ways that we do interviewing and stuff and tends to be a biased process. So it's complicated.
Yeah, one thing that I think is often done wrong is that the inconsequential positions are often advertised and searched for in great detail, but the more meaty roles are designed, those positions are decided behind closed doors, and announcements are made that so-and-so is leaving or doesn't want to do it, and here's the successor, and that position is not really announced, and there's not a formal interview process, and that can lead to demotivation, particularly for those who are interested, because The extroverts will go and convey what they're thinking, but the introverts will not. And it's not always that the extrovert will do a better job than the introvert. So I think that's very important that we have biases, because we will always give those positions to people who have the same traits as us. So sometimes it's important to have a selection committee that is completely separate from the leaders, at least to make recommendations. Now, if those recommendations can't be accepted, that's fine, but at least make an attempt to due diligence and try to get as much bias out of the way. And then finally, if you think somebody has a lot of talent and a lot of energy, but they're not fulfilling their potential, take a chance on them. Give them that role with an acting title and see what they can do in 6 months or a year, and you might be surprised.
That's great. Well, it looks like we have a few minutes just to get some final thoughts from our panelists and our speakers. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank both of you. I think this has been a phenomenal offering. I think it's very important for our mid-career faculty to hear this, particularly as they are navigating these difficult decisions on their career choices. I remind people that this is going to be happening about monthly. Our next one is mid-November with Dr. Carolyn Meltzer, who's going to be speaking on difficult conversations. So final thoughts from our panelists?
I'll go first because I struggle with this maybe a little bit more than Matt, and I think it life for some of your colleagues will often look more glamorous from the outside because we don't see their struggles and challenges and how they're navigating it. Sometimes people don't open up as much as we hope that they would. But again, everybody is so different. And if you're struggling in mid-career, whether it be for career advancement opportunities, whether it be with your financial situation, or whether it be with your work volumes or work expectations, that's kind of, first, it's normal. So normalize these challenges and then reach out and talk incessantly with people, your colleagues, how they do it. Our challenges are not unique. We all have the same challenges, and some of us have solutions that have worked tremendously well. So I would just say modify and adopt those solutions. Let's not try to invent the wheel, but also get some ideas from outside of medicine that are so obvious in the business space that we are so far behind in medicine with some of those things.
Yeah, I would, I'm going to use my closing seconds to actually read something that Liz Heck posted in the chat because I think it's smart. She says, it's trying to shift from a feeling like a victim or a passive in the world to reframe it as empowerment and being proactive and being a leader in your own life. And she says, if you're feeling lost, then maybe you are not aligning with your true goals and you can adjust to make new choices. And this is kind of the coaching mindset that Liz is talking about, is being, instead of being a passive recipient to the things that happen to us, it kind of ties back to the strategic thinking component from some of the slides, is I want to be intentional about my choices. And I am not just a passive recipient of the things that happen to me. I have agency for change. I can do something about it. If I'm in a situation I don't like, I can change it tomorrow if I want. Now, granted, there's going to be complexity to that decision, but it starts with recognizing I'm in a place I don't like and I'm going to change it. And the first thing that I need to do is X. And until we make that decision to make a change, to adjust what we're doing and saying, I don't have to tolerate having an unhappy life anymore. Until we do that, we're just going to wallow. But we have the agency for change. And so we should create a strategic plan for ourselves because we are the currency that matters the most to ourselves, except for maybe our kids.
Wow, everyone has shared just some amazing truth bombs here. I really appreciate everyone's insight and honesty and vulnerability here. So thank you for sharing all of these thoughts. And thank you everyone for attending and being so engaged. We look forward to having more time with you in the future.
Thanks, appreciate it. You guys have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.